That's the sound of an old narrow-gauge railroad in Chama, New Mexico. Last month, I had the privilege of being a part of the Roots on the Narrow Gauge, a train and road trip across New Mexico and Colorado with Tom Russell and Ramblin' Jack Elliott. I drove Ramblin' Jack from town to town, and the three of us played shows every night, and I recorded the interview you're going to listen to today. A big thank you to Tom Russell and the Roots on the Rails folks for inviting me to be a part of the Roots on the Narrow Gauge. I really can't say enough good things about that trip, and if you are interested in going on a trip like that in the future, check out Roots on the Rails at rootsontherails.com. I'd like to start today's show with a poem written by Robert Louis Stevenson in 1885. This piece is entitled From a Railway Carriage. Faster than fairies, faster than witches, bridges and houses, hedges and ditches, and charging along like troops in a battle. All through the meadows, the horses and cattle, all of the sights of the hill and the plain fly as thick as driving rain. And ever again, in the wink of an eye, painted stations whistle by. Here is a child who clambers and scrambles, all by himself and gathering brambles. Here is a tramp who stands and gazes, and there is the green for stringing the daisies. Here is a cart run away in the road, lumping along with man and load. And here is a mill, and there is a river, each a glimpse, and gone forever. Howdy folks, this is Andy Hedges, and you're listening to Cowboy Crossroads. On each episode, I interview a different guest and ask them to share stories and discuss music, poetry, and culture from the working cowboy west and beyond. My guest today is songwriter Tom Russell. I interviewed Tom on the show last year, and if you haven't listened to that yet, you might want to go back and check that out on episode 18. We recorded today's interview in front of a live audience inside the Grand Imperial Hotel in Silverton, Colorado during the Roots on the Narrow Gauge train trip. Here's Tom Russell.
I grew up, born in the late 40s and the 50s of LA. I'm writing a few songs about it now and working on a novel, as I've said for the last 50 years. I had one crime novel published in Norway that I think it was Carol or somebody said they have it. It's in Norwegian, thank God. And I'm working on another just for fun. That's my third occupation. But so LA in the 50s, and what's fascinating about it, well, many things. My father was an Iowa farm boy, a horseman that came west. I talked a lot about that on a record called The Man from God Knows Where. He came from horse traders that came from Ireland, and he had one Norwegian background. Got all that on the record. And he went out west and went for the American dream, but ended up in jail for 3 months after he went too far, some kind of blue-collar crime when I was a teenager. Very significant, but horses were always there. And as I wrote in the book, Ceremonies of the Horseman, my brother's obsessed with it. Jack knows my brother. My brother's 3 or 4 years older than me. He's probably one of the top horsemen in California. He's a livestock contractor, which means he's the guy behind the scenes at the rodeos and the high-end cutting horse thing. A cutting horse, if you don't know what it is, and I never got into it, but a lot of people with money, there's some cattle in the arena, maybe, 20 head of cattle. The guy goes in with a high-end quarter horse, and the horse does all the work and gets one cow out and keeps it out. And, it's not that exciting to me, but they need a lot of cattle. So my brother is dealing with 1,000 head of cattle every week, where he gets them and this and that. He has a ranch up in Northern California. Anyway, my brother's playing cowboy records in the early 50s. He's got a huge stack of Hank Williams 78s and Tex Ritter 78s and first Johnny Cash record, which was called The Hot and Blue Guitars of Johnny Cash. And it had a deco cover on it, not even Johnny Cash's picture. He gave it to me. I still got it. It was a deco cover of these guitars. And he's playing all this stuff nonstop. And he's the horseman. The minute he sees a horse, I've rarely seen him off a horse. So my father, meanwhile, is investing all our money in race horses, claiming horses. You buy a horse cheap at the track and you try to move them up, you know. And so he's up and down. My brother hangs out at the track, Hollywood Park, which no longer exists. My brother hot walks horses, which once the horse come off the track, you have to walk a thoroughbred to cool them down. They're such hot-blooded animals and dangerous animals. But he got on a horse and never looked back. So we had horses as kids, and he built a bucking barrel in the backyard out of a 40-gallon oil drum suspended on garage door springs. And that's how he practiced his bull riding, and he proceeded to launch the neighborhood kids into outer space. And then they decided they didn't want to be bull riders. And you had to do what Pat told you, you know. You have to say, like Casey would or something, ride a bull. You had to say all the words right, you know. And he launched me, and I knew right away I wasn't going to be the rodeo guy. But he played all this music. Then one summer he ran off into the mountains, the Sierra Nevadas, Mineral King, Yosemite, and packed mules, tourists back in, like Ross Knox did in the Grand Canyon, packed tourists back in for 2 weeks. And every guy that packed had to know 20 cowboy songs at night and recitations, very much like what you do. Face on the Barroom Floor and those old Tex Ritter songs. So he came back with a ton of cowboy songs. And meanwhile, back at the ranch, back at the house, suburban house in Inglewood, my mom's playing more sophisticated music, Broadway musicals, which I'm also into. That's where the Rose of Roscrea came from. So we were hearing Oklahoma and Annie Get Your Gun and stuff like that, and going to see the musicals, The Music Man. And it's all rubbed off on me. And then her brother, who's passed, named George Malloy, was a classical pianist and a good friend of mine. He never married. He ended up in New York in a rent-controlled apartment on 72nd Broadway, near where John Lennon got shot, and I was in town that day, playing behind opera singers and touring the world. And at the March on Washington, Martin Luther King March on Washington, Roberta Peters was supposed to sing the national anthem before Dylan and Joan Baez sang. Dylan sang When the Ships Come In and Only a Pawn in Your Game. That's on YouTube. And Star Spangled Banner is on YouTube. You can barely see my uncle, but somebody didn't show, and they called my uncle out of the audience, and he played behind this African-American singer named Camilla Williams, the Star Spangled Banner. And I learned all this stuff when he was kind of on his deathbed. I mean, we knew he was a big-time guy. But the other thing was he played in a couple movies because he was in the Union. So he'd get a call, Western movie downtown, you're playing like this guy playing in the saloon in our hotel, barroom cowboy piano. So he'd get a part in a lot of these movies as a pianist. So all this stuff was kind of going around, and then I, a kind of the introverted kid, believe it or not, got into folk music big time. I was a athlete first, you know. I was a football player, and my room was covered with colored pictures of athletes and boxers and rodeo guys. And then I got into the Kingston Trio and the Limelighters and the commercial end. And then I discovered Ramblin' Jack and the blues guys. I got to see Mississippi John Hurt and Mance Lipscomb and, Dave Van Ronk, and then I got to see Ian and Sylvia at the Ash Grove. And
At what point in all this did you pick up a guitar yourself? And
well, my brother, God bless him, has kind of atonal voice. He would love to be a singer, but he can't sing in tune, and he's been chewing tobacco since he was 20. If you met him here, you wouldn't believe he was my brother, because he's like Slim Pickens. He worked with Casey Tibbs. He worked with a lot of people. And he knows that L.A. horse scene, the 50s, and he keeps pushing me to do something about it, because he says, there's 100,000 horses here, and nobody really remembers all that. Stables and Western movies. But anyway, he had a guitar he bought in Tijuana, a gut string guitar, and he just wasn't getting anywhere, and I stole it from him. And somebody said, you got to stop that god-awful noise that's coming out of your brother's bedroom. And so I kind of learned some chords and messed around, but I didn't have any, I was kind of scared of singing in front of people for a long time. I didn't develop much stage presence till down the line. I had to pay my dues after college, but so I got his guitar. The first good guitar I got was before I went to Africa in 1967. Back when you could walk, like Guy said, like when you could walk into a pawn shop and there'd be a couple old Martins there. I mean, you can't do that now in a pawn shop. And there was a 1946 D18 Beat to Hell. Whoever was playing this guitar played it. And it's just like it was, except for the bullet holes in the back now. Well, we can get to that. But it was $150, and it's still got the same tuning pegs and everything. And I started get a little better on that, and I took it to Africa with me in 1969 for a year, and I started playing. And I hung out with so many academic people. I decided I didn't want to hang out with any more academic people, and I was going to start at the bottom in the music business. So I ended up on Skid Row in Vancouver.
Before we get to that, how did the move to Africa happen, and the criminology degree, and where in the world did all that come from, and what
I was
drew
a
you into
genius
that?
at one time. What happened was, if I can put it together quickly, well, there's a lot of cool stories. Anyway, I had this career as a kid because I was obsessed with music as the world's greatest gatecrasher. So if I wanted to go see Ramblin' Jack or Mississippi John or Dylan or the Beatles, I didn't have enough money. I snuck in some way. And I had all these, I don't know where this came from, but I'd go to the back of the theater, and when the first show let out, I'd walk in backwards talking about I lost my wallet or something. And I had this stuff that worked. So I'm going to get to how I got to college, but with the Beatles, I was a big guy. I played defensive right end on a really good team, but 210 pounds or something. Beatles, I jumped in front of their car in front of the Hollywood Bowl and started telling people to get out of the way, and went right in past security. And this is in the newspaper. I got it. It's in the L.A. Herald Express. And they thought I was a security guard, opened the door, let John and Paul got out, and John said, couldn't have done it without you. And they went on stage. So I was kind of this part-time criminal, and I met Bob Dylan because I got into his dressing room, and I got a telegram for Bob Dylan, and I had a telegram for Bob Dylan because I took it from the messenger who didn't know who Bob Dylan. I work with Bobby, I'll take it in there. And he goes, are you sure? He goes, nobody but me gives Bobby this telegram. Like I said, obviously you can tell from my personality, which I have about 10 of them, I could pull it off, and I was big enough. And Dylan looked at me like, yeah, thanks, man. And after the show, he looked at me because I stayed near stage, and he laughed when he passed me on stage. He liked that kind of thing. And he rolled down the window in the parking lot. He was with Bobby Newirth, who I know now. And he said, hey, telegram boy, come over here. I got, oh, shit. My friends are going, shit, man, you should have never done that. He goes, let me ask you a question. And, by this time, I'm idolizing the guy. And he goes, tell me something. Tell me right now. Where's the nearest liquor store? And I go, I don't know. I'm 15, And the guy behind me is 18 driving the car. He goes, I know where it is, Bobby. Follow us. So I go, shit, what do you do? We get in the car. Dylan follows us. 4 guys in his car down Santa Monica Boulevard. It was at the Santa Monica Civic. First light, second light. They're right behind us, I'm going, you idiot. He goes, man, we're just going to keep going down the road. We're traveling with Bob Dylan. I go, you better find a liquor store. We're looking for signs. Fourth light, Dylan's had enough. He's in the driver's seat. He's already got a bottle of Beaujolais, So he jumps out of the car, and I've had this affirmed, and dances around our car laughing at us. And we thought, he's got a gun or something. And he was just messing with us. Really cool, got back in the car. They drove around us into history. And I wondered if I dreamt that, and a guy that's coming to my show next week in L.A. goes, everything you said is true. He did that, So that was the one time I met Dylan. But anyway, I'll get you to Nigeria quickly now, because that's how I got into college. My grades weren't great. I went to a Catholic boys' school, Loyola High, because I could play football, and it was a good school. Lots of literature. 10 of these guys are coming to my show in L.A. Next Sunday or whenever it is. But we were the number 2 team in the nation in 1964, and I have a song about it on Folk Hotel. I met Jack Kennedy, the L.A. Coliseum. Once again, I was a kid that walked up to his car back when you'd want to do it, and he stuck out his hand and said, I said, good luck. And I had to play a football game in there on the night that he was shot. So I have a song about that called Rise Up Handsome Johnny. So I didn't have good enough grades to get into the University of California at Santa Barbara. I don't know why. I think I'm like doing a police report here. But I think it's kind of funny. But I told him I had a letter from Mayor Sam Yorty of L.A., and so I wrote Sam Yorty and said, I helped you on your campaign. Can you write me a letter of recommendation? And he did, and it got me into the university, which I was not really qualified to take these classes, and I flunked out in 6 months. Went to junior college for a year, got interested in sociology, got a little more mature, and came back to University of California. Met a guy, and this will get us to Africa, named Bill Chambliss. Very high-end criminologist, and he's passed away 5 or 6 years ago. Cool dude. He played Leonard Cohen songs. We drank wine together. We played Leonard Cohen songs. We bought horses together. He was my kind of guy, and he had a wife and 3 kids. So he gets a gig from the Rockefeller Foundation in Africa, Nigeria, for a year. And he wants to take some African-American guys over. Well, meanwhile, the riots are starting all over, and they're burning the university down, and they're burning the Bank of America down, and none of these guys could go. So he finally asked me, you want to go as my student teacher to Nigeria? Well, I didn't really know where Nigeria was at the time. I go, okay. And he said, okay, blah, 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 we'll get you the money. And it came through, and the gig came through. What I wasn't aware of at the time was that they were just finishing up the Biafran War, which was a hairy, one of the worst wars of all time. I don't know how many millions of people were killed, but it was a tribal war between the Yoruba, the dominant tribe, and the Igbos, which are down in eastern Nigeria, and it had a lot to do with oil. There's a lot of oil there. We were 200 miles off the front line, but still there was a lot of gun. I got arrested coming off the plane for taking pictures in a war zone, and I had no clue. And a Rockefeller guy grabbed the guy and bribed him right away, so they let me in the country. I got arrested going out of the country a year later for something, and I learned how to bribe. but always people were pointing guns in your face, So we kind of hid near the university, and I started playing more guitar and teaching a little, but it was in the middle of a war, so you kind of tried to stay away from trouble. But I'd go down to some of these bars. I get to play with King Sunny Ade, who had a steel guitar player, and get that white kid up here, and I'd play one chord. They would play a song last for an hour and a half. You wouldn't hear this on a record. And one day, to kind of end up with the talking drum thing, the university had 20 talking drummers at an exhibition playing this beautiful drum music, and standing in back was a white woman, looked like Betty Davis, elderly white woman. At the time, I would have thought she was 80. Well, she was around 60. I asked somebody, who's that? She's telling the drummers what to do. They go, that's Suzanne Wenger. Don't go over to her. She won't talk to you in English. She speaks Yoruba. Well, it turned out she went over there with a white anthropologist and ran off with a primitive Nigerian drummer and went into the forest and became a white priestess up in a shogbo, which is in my song, East of Woodstock, and developed this art community up country. So I went up and tried to talk to her once, but she wouldn't speak English. But you can see her on YouTube. She passed away. She was 100. Heavy-duty person, So all this stuff was going down. I went down to the marketplace and got a guy to teach me how to carve wood because I knew I wasn't going to go any further in the academic trade, so I played. Came back a year later and with a lot of African art, and ended up in Vancouver on Skid Row with my band, the Mule Train Review, Skid Row's finest band.
Tom Russell has 3 concept records that he has referred to as his American Trilogy. This includes the albums The Man from God Knows Where, Hotwalker, and The Rose of Roscrea. These recordings are unlike anything else you've ever heard and are favorites among Tom Russell fans. I asked Tom to talk about where those concepts came from.
Well, 2 things, going back to when I talked about what I listened to as a kid. Folk music, cowboy music, but Broadway musicals. I was obsessed kind of with the Broadway musicals of the 40s and 50s. Those were the good years, And Rodgers and Hammerstein, Lowe, and who is the other guy? But Lerner and Lowe, yeah. I just read Lerner's book, so I should have known that. But they did Gigi, and they did My Fair Lady, which we just saw on Broadway. And what I always like were the minor characters. They steal the show. The same way in Les Mis, Master of the House. It's the minor characters. The writing in those musicals, tremendous. And recently I've met a great music hall singer from Germany named Florian Schneider, who's a big star in Germany and Switzerland. He and I are going to do a record. We're going to go back and forth with some Irish songs. A tremendous singer. But so anyway, I was kind of obsessed with the form of taking a group of 10 or 15 songs and making a musical out of it. And Man from God Knows Where, thank God it was funded by a Norwegian Christian label in Norway, which had a lot of money, and told them that I wanted to do a song cycle about my ancestors, most of whom came from Ireland, but one main guy came from Bergen, Norway. And I've always connected with Norway and have done pretty well there. Used to play there 2 months at a time with Andy and the band and Fats. But so this was 15 years ago. I don't know when that record came out, but he said, let's do it. Have you got the songs? And I said, yeah, most of them, because it comes right out of my ancestors' mouths. I had the journals and everything. We came here and it was rough, and we cleared 40 acres of land, and the people from the Civil War came back, and we made whiskey. I had all the information, ending up with my old man in jail and the horse stuff there, throwing horseshoes at the moon. So he says, let's do it. So he rents a farmhouse, a historic farmhouse on the west coast of Norway near the Hardanger Fjord. And he hires the best folk musicians in Norway and the best singers, and brings some people over from Ireland, including Dolores Keane, one of the greatest singers that ever come out of Ireland. She's still alive, I think, and quite a drinker. And got a lot of good stories about her, but she traveled with Nancy Griffith and I. But and then Dave Van Ronk was the only one that he did his part in New York because he couldn't come over. And Iris DeMent came over. And we lived in this farmhouse for 2 weeks, and it had a setup in the ballroom like this, and we would have a catered dinner and breakfast every day, and then we'd go in, and with these great musicians, I'd show them the song, and then he put the record together, and it went out, and I guess it was on High Tone. It was on the Norwegian label, then High Tone, and it actually did very well. It was reviewed in the New York Times and Atlantic Monthly, and so I had the urge to do that, not ever thinking. I thought it might end up as a musical, which I guess it's been in a few productions in colleges. And Hotwalker came from, I was working on another record, I think Borderland, and somehow I heard the voice of Little Jack Horton. What, don't you start on me. Some people were creeping me out. He just kept talking to me. And I thought, man, I want to do a spoken word record and get some of my heroes in there. I knew Charles Bukowski and met him once. That's a whole other funny story on Hollywood and Vine, but corresponded for 30 years, and there's a book of our correspondence out. But he's on the record, a funny vignette. Kerouac is on the record. A dozen American voices that spoke to me, and we got the okay to use them as long as we didn't go beyond 2 minutes or something. And Edward Abbey's on the record, and I wove music and Little Jack's voice in there as the narrator. And there's 2 main songs on there. There's Grapevine, about when you come over the Grapevine Hill from L.A. down into the great San Joaquin Valley. There's Bakersfield over here, and I didn't mention that music. That's another music I grew up on. Buck Owens, Merle Haggard, Wynn Stewart, and the twang. That's going to be the sound of my next record that I'm cutting in a few weeks in Austin with Bill Kirchen. Nadine loves Bakersfield music, and she loves Bill Kirchen, so we're going to get that sound. I'm writing some country song. So Grapevine is on that record, and a song about Woody Guthrie, I think, and call up Ramblin' Jack in the middle of the night, and I say, I'm going to record this, Jack, and tell me about Woody, and you can hear him on there go, well, Woody, he was a strange guy. Nobody really liked him much, except for his songs. And then I go into this song, Woodrow. And see, that's stuff I like, because not a lot of people, Pete Seeger wouldn't say that. And Woody was a strange guy. And I'd go out, like his wife said, he'd go out for a cigarette and he'd be gone for 2 months, He'd run off with a woman or something. And Woody had some wild side. Same way with Phil Oakes, everybody worships Phil Oakes, except when he was down and out, as Dave Van Ronk, who you dig, I know, and Dave was a good friend of mine, said they didn't really want to know Phil when he was lying in the gutter. They stepped over him, So that, to me, that's, heartbreaking. So I tried to get at some of that.
On my last interview with Tom, he shared some stories of bad gigs and later mentioned to me that there were plenty more for another episode.
God, just a month ago, a couple of things. Every night on Skid Row could have been a bad gig. You would look out, a cop came in one night and said, there are 8 felonies a night committed in this club. We're going to close it down, because you could see people being rolled and thrown out in the alley, and the alley was horrible, Skid, Death Row, meth, and all this stuff. But and then Onyx and Pharaoh, and Onyx's lover got shot one night at a club, and but just last month, 2 months ago, because it can happen at any time. But I had this concept. We were over in Switzerland all summer, and we played Holland, Norway, Finland, Germany. But then I was kind of idle, and I was writing and songs and painting, but I wanted to play. So I figured I'd create this alter ego called Country Johnny from Fort Worth, USA, playing country music. And I was going to go down to these country bars near us in Bern that featured these guys that don't really make it in the States, so they go over to Europe. And just because they say they're from Fort Worth, and then they play background music like we did in country bars and get paid $50 a night. And I go, I'll do that just for kicks, because I can sing all these songs. And my wife, everybody's kind of, I don't know, we go back to one of the gigs I used to play when I had a band, and he says, Tom, I don't know. People are going to know who you are. I don't think you can pull this off. And I go, yeah, but it'd be funny. And he goes, I don't know, Tom. So the guy across the street from our apartment, it has his 60th birthday, and we meet him in New York. He's coming back to Switzerland. He says, why don't you sing some songs, And he's got about 50 employees, young guys, woodworkers, and having 100 people there, a catered barbecue. And he goes, you can be the entertainment. And I go, yeah, Country Johnny, So we give him a rap. He doesn't speak English that good. That don't tell these people who Tom is, really, because we don't, Tom has records out, or he was on Letterman, and we don't want people coming around the apartment, But you can tell him when you introduce him, you can say he has records out. So he does the opposite. They build a big stage. They got a PA system. It's 100 people there drinking beer, and the young guys who I know are going to be trouble, are down the other end of the room because it's World Cup time. I think it's near the end of World Cup time. All they want to do is drink the free beer and watch the soccer game. I don't blame him, So then here's all these tables that he expects are going to fill up with people that are going to go nuts, And he gets up there, and she would have to translate what he was saying, but he basically said, well, there's some American guy lives next door that wants to sing some song. Like if people are going, what? You know what you'd say if he goes, hey, my next door neighbor wants to sing. Can he get up and sing? Oh. So they went further they went further into the corner and were talking, all these guys, and watching the soccer. Nadine and her mom are sitting in front of me along with the guy, and I didn't realize till later what he had said. But, of course, I'd be in the corner, too, drinking beer, except I slowly won about 10 people over, and some gals started dancing, and some of the guys saying, hey, it's pretty good, But after 35, 40 minutes of doing Folsom Prison Blues and every trick in the book, I was pretty much done. And, I got off stage. Her mom asked me, so, Country Johnny, when's the next gig? That's it. So you learn a bad gig could happen. It doesn't happen that much anymore. But, but I've learned to deal with it. I worked in a comedy bar once in San Francisco in the late 70s when I got out of music for a little while. Robin Williams would come in to work on his chops, and he was in Mork and Mindy. He was starting to be really famous. And he'd come in, get behind the bar with me, and pour beer and do routines. And I saw him take somebody apart one night on stage, just a little 50-seat club, and a woman started heckling him. She was drunk, and I watched him artistically take her apart in about 20 minutes, till when she left the club, she looked like 50 years older than when we walked in. So I was absorbing all this, like, whoa, man. So I don't get heckled much anymore, but we had a sold-out show in Santa Fe a few years ago, and one of my fans, a lady fan, I didn't know she was a fan. Why somebody would pay $30 or $40 to come in and heckle you, but she's about 10 feet away from me, drunk, and give me a bad time. And the thing about handling a heckler is in the end, you know you're alone. I know you've been there. You know you're alone, mostly. A security guy isn't going to come down, and you're making the rest of the audience uncomfortable if you get angry. You can't get angry. You got to do it in a humorous way. So I had repartee with her and eventually calmed her down, but people were getting nervous, and then it got funny. And when it gets funny, the tension goes away, So, I mean, a bad gig can happen eventually, but...
How'd you get the hole in that guitar?
Well, during that time, I was driving cab in New York when the first group broke up. Hardin and Russell. Patricia Hardin was a classical pianist from Texas, and I moved from Vancouver to Austin because I heard about the Austin scene. I took a Greyhound Ameripass bus pass across the U.S. and sang on the Grand Ole Opry with Kinky Friedman. I told that story to somebody today. Stopped in Austin in 1972, and all these people were coming there. Like Willie was showing up, and Towns and Guy. And I knew these guys were the real thing, like big-time songwriters, Jerry Jeff. And I was just starting to write songs, so I thought, moving to Austin. And where am I? Oh, okay, met Patricia Hardin. She was in a band. We formed a duo, and we were getting pretty good. And we had a record offer from Vanguard Records that had Joan Baez. It turned down Bob Dylan before he went to Columbia. We thought we'd hit the big time right off the bat, and we got, I don't know what we did, but we got too pushy with them or wanted to hire a producer they didn't want to hire, and then they didn't do the deal. So we made 2 records on our own. Only record I've ever had reviewed in the Rolling Stone was the first record called Ring of Bone. And it's interesting. She was a very good musician and a very good singer, and we won the Kerrville New Folk 73 or 74. Anyway, broke up in San Francisco, worked in a comedy bar, moved to New York, tried to start over, and started driving cab. And later I picked up Robert Hunter, but I got kind of down and out because I was driving 6 at night till 6 in the morning, which made you kind of nuts because you couldn't find your sleep cycle anymore. So I was getting kind of out there, and a guy came to New York that I knew in San Francisco whose father owned a carnival, traveling carnival. He was from Montreal, and he was going to set up the biggest carnival in the world in Puerto Rico, San Juan, Puerto Rico. And this was 81, 82, the time of the great urban cowboy scare, when you had mechanical bucking bulls in bars, and you had to play Cotton Eye Joe on the fiddle because that movie with John Travolta was a big deal. It started the two-step and the line dancing phase in the 80s and the bucking bulls. So they had a bucking bull down at this carnival in a huge tent, and they needed a country singer. So he said, "You want to go down there? We'll pay you $500 a week for 2 months." And we got a band, and everybody around New York was saying, go, get back into the business, man. You're going nuts. So I flew down there, and most of it's in the song called The Road to Bayamon. And the band turned out to be a 10-piece disco band from Montreal, and they weren't really into Tom Russell's Johnny Cash imitations, and I had written Gallo del Cielo by then, which I sang for Robert Hunter. That got me back into the business, but I was singing Gallo every night. But the band, they were called Fussy Cussy. They were from Montreal, famous. They weren't into the band, the stuff I was doing, and a lot of drinking was going on, and the Puerto Ricans weren't much into it either. They were into salsa, and hey, when's the music start? So there's a lot of aggravation. A lot of the carnies liked me. So I learned a lot about the carnival business, and there was a big woman named Gypsy, weighed about 400 pounds, that took care of me, kind of like, don't give Tom any shit. I like what he's doing. But the security guards didn't like me, so I made the mistake one night of leaving my D18 in the dressing room, and some guy used it for target practice. His buddy told me, they put it up on the wall and shot it put a .22 pistol in the sound hole and shot the back out, and said, tell him next time he'll be playing it, like, yikes. So things started, the vibes started going bad, and then the tropical storm started. And a lot of the carnies, and there were hundreds of them, and they're different people with a different language, like Little Jack, and they started getting violent and rioting. Some guy got up on, there was a high wire going across the whole carnival, and some drunk got up there one night and fell off, and things like that started happening. They had a freak show, two-headed cow or something, and somebody stole it, and it was just like the vibes were rotten. And I knew the owner of the carnival, and he says, "Time for you to get out of here, it's going to get bad." And his wife went around somewhere and got me a big shopping bag full of 5s and 1s and 20s, and I said, catch the next flight out, and there's about $1,000 in there. And I went home finally a month into the carny with my shot up guitar, and
I'd like to talk about your writing a bit. I'm curious about what your writing process looks like these days. If you write on the road or at home or certain times a day, or if you have a routine, or if you just wait for the inspiration to strike.
Yeah, both, a little of both, but I do work every day. As I say, we live part-time in Switzerland in a farm town where there's a lot of horses and cattle, and I like the atmosphere. There's plenty of roadhouses down the road with good food, but it's inspirational. And then we've been living in Santa Fe, which is inspirational too. We built me a big studio, and I'm looking out at the desert, and I have my painting studio, and that's gone very well because my biggest gallery is which we're going to go through at the end of this sojourn, is in downtown Santa Fe on the square called the Rainbow Man. And interesting gallery because beyond the Tom Russell room is the Edward Curtis photographs. This guy's an authority on them, and Edward Curtis did all the famous photos of Native Americans back at the turn of the century. And he's also an authority on Pendleton trade blankets, so he'll be there. Bob Capone, give you a little talk, interesting guy, and I'll show you my stuff. But so we get up in the morning and do a little yoga. Nadine's a yoga instructor, and she knows a lot about exercise and food, and that helps on the road. And we walk, usually walk an hour a day, and then it's time to go to work. Usually I paint a little to loosen up, and then I have to play guitar every day. So I pick up. It's a physical. That's something I told Tyson last week. Are you playing the guitar? Because Jack is amazing. I think he's still playing damn good, but you have to play every day because of your hands and your calluses and your wrists. And so I try to play 30, 40 minutes a day. And it can be boring because there's no feedback here. You're playing to the wall. But generally that starts a song, or I'll have a big stack of papers here. I got about 12 songs for the next record. I'm working on them constantly to try to tighten them up. I just demoed them in Santa Fe. Now I want to listen to them on the road and see if they hold up before I play them for a band. And so I'm probably working on songs for, and there's a lot of time in Switzerland because there's nothing else. There's no TV. Nadine goes out, does a lot of yoga, and they have a routine. So I work 2 or 3 hours a day writing. I'm working on a Western novel for fun again. I'm always working on an essay. Somebody like Range Magazine or a folk magazine will ask me to write about something, and I'll be happy to because I like the process. And I have that book of essays, Ceremonies to the Horseman, when I was writing 5,000-word pieces for Bill Reynolds. And that was a great magazine. It's just he put too much money into it. It was just so good. And so I'm working on essays and the novel a little bit, and the songs. The songs are number one, always number one, and then painting's probably number 2 because it's so peaceful. And she's got me standing up all day. I never sit down anymore till we eat. So the computer, if I'm writing on the computer, it's stacked up here, on books. Because like Hemingway, when I got into his house in Cuba, Hemingway always wrote standing up. It's just a different, there's something about it, but it works. You don't get tired as much, and you got a break. And so I'm going around in a circle, kind of. I'm painting. I have a small room in Switzerland, big room in Santa Fe. Working on this painting, Ramblin' Jack. Then I go back and work on a song and an essay, and that goes on 4 or 5 hours a day until happy hour. Man, and God created happy hour. And then, because for a good reason, not that I don't drink that much, but same way after the show, I like to have a good drink because there's a time when you want to unplug. Because I'm always thinking of songs, 24/7, and I can't do that all night long. So the process is something like that.
When we were emailing, you said to ask you about a couple of cowboy tunes you're working on.
Record starts off with a song. And I envision this record. It starts off with a song about Kerouac that's got a country beat. And a good friend who's become a good friend, I've never met him, is Douglas Brinkley, who lives in Austin. He's a CNN commentator. Douglas knows Ramblin' Jack. And Douglas edited Jack Kerouac's journals, which are quite fascinating. You don't get a real idea of Kerouac till you read his journals of how hard he worked. He's living with his mother out on Ocean Parkway in Brooklyn, writing sun down to sun up before he even published a novel. But anyways, a song about Kerouac and a song called Small Engine Repair that I talked about a guy that fixed my lawnmower. There's a song that's called Isidore Gonzalez. He's mentioned in my essay on Buffalo Bill in Europe. And Isidore Gonzalez was a real person. He was a Mexican guy who dressed up, in the sombrero and the big thing and rode a bronc through the arena, 2 shows a day. And he got killed by a horse rolled over on him, and he got killed. And he's buried in Bristol, England. And he was from Monterrey, Mexico. So I wrote a corrido about him. That'll have a accordion, and it's a cowboy song. And then, this is good. There's a song called Pass Me the Gun, Billy. I don't know if we talked about this, but I'm living with my brother Pat. When I flunked out of college for the first time, went up to play football at a junior college in San Luis Obispo called Cuesta, and that's when I quit my football career. I was into playing in 110 heat, and I wanted to play guitar. And anyway, I'm living with my brother out on the end of Edna Road in San Luis Obispo, and my brother's always up for trouble of any kind, cowboy trouble. And we're watching TV, and he says, "Turn the TV down, I just heard a gunshot." I go, "What?" I go, "Oh, God." He goes, "Somebody's poaching cattle out in the pasture. Call Billy Mello, who still works with him. Call Billy down the road and tell him to cut the road off." So he looks out and he sees a car out there, some kind of Hudson, some creepy old car. Somebody has shot something on his property. You don't do that to a cowboy rancher. And he goes, "Get your stuff. We're going after him." Jump in the truck with my brother, and he takes off and down out to the front gate. He's got a dog in the back, Australian Shepherd, down the road to Billy Mello's house. Well, Billy's out there waiting, and Billy jumps in, and he goes, "Well, where are they?" He goes, "They didn't come by here. They went the side road to the Pacific Ocean to a place called Okie Flats, Oso Flaco." "Let's go, get in, Billy." He takes off 90 miles an hour down that side road, and I'm in the middle going, "Holy shit, let me out of here," because he gets right up on the guys I could tell right away this is going to go bad because this guy turns around and looks. There's two of them. And right away, I know it's going to be deliverance. And we're going to be bent over the log. Because that's what these guys look like. And my brother's playing the big tough cowboy. And come on, William. Boom. We hit the Pacific coast. We go over 101. They go under 101. And they pull off into the ditch, into wildflower bed. As I'm rhyming all this in the song that I'm working on. There's four of them in the car. And the three of them get out with shotguns and aim it right at the truck. And our truck comes to a halt about 5-10 yards away. And one of those things when a phrase comes into your life that you never forget. When my brother turns over, pushes me out of the way, he goes, "Pass me the gun, Billy." And Billy goes, "Pat, we ain't got no gun." And I go, "Holy shit!" And I put my head under the dashboard, and my brother's putting the car on. He goes, "Billy, where the hell is the gun?" And he goes, "Pat, we ain't never had a gun." And they're about ready to shoot, and he takes off, and they don't shoot. And the end of the story, and it's all going to be in the song, "Pass me the gun, Billy, we ain't got no gun." My brother's going to love this because and Billy, who shows up at the gigs, every time I mention the story, everybody goes, "Did that happen?" It's like the same way people ask me about the Bob Dylan. Well, yeah, it happened. And so we pull off, get away, call the cops. The cops come. They take us to the guy's house, and they got him in handcuffs. It turns out they had to be identified. His old man is up at the house. He got a bonfire already. The guy's from Arkansas. They just robbed 2 liquor stores. You could tell these people were bad trouble, you know. And the last thing the cop says to my brothers, "Next time you boys go to chasing poachers, you might want to pack your gun." So that's all in the song. So those are 2 cowboys kind of songs. You had to have been there to felt the tension. I was working on this, is just funny, so I'll do it. And it's kind of cowboy, but it's my GPS love song. You know how addicted we have to be to GPSs, and it makes me nervous because I was, from the old day of atlases, and I like to see the distance between El Paso and New York, which is approximately 3,600 miles. 1,800 miles of it is Texas. I like to see it. Well, those days are gone, So the GPS, this is, I looked out on our balcony in Switzerland. Every day this same old hawk comes over and says hello, And every time I'm out on an interstate, I see a hawk up there. And these are the guys that really have the GPS. So here's my GPS love song. I hope nobody steals it. I'll try to remember it. It's called The Back Streets of Love. There's a hawk high above an interstate. He's the Lord of all things down below. Here we are, babe, trapped down on the interstate, listening to some woman on a telephone. Proceed to the route, the voice keeps demanding. She's following directions from a satellite above. We made all the right turns, but something is burning, 'cause we're lost on the back streets of love. Where are we now? Who are we anyhow, now that push has finally come to shove? We laid down a little path of pebble stones so we could find our way back home. But hell, we're lost on the back streets of love. There's a hawk high above a forest. He's hunting for some movement down below. And deep in that forest, on a road not taken, We're gearing up for the second show. Our global position, artist and musician, following a signal deep in the blood. Like every poet in the game, our direction stays the same. We're lost on the back streets of love. Where are we now? Who the hell are we anyhow? Now that push has finally come to shove. We've exhausted every prayer. There must be a God somewhere out there, 'cause we're lost on the back streets of love. Boy, it's getting dark out there. Time to light a roadside flare when you're lost on the back streets of love. There's a hawk high above the interstate. He's the Lord of all things down below, down below. The GPS song. Artist and musician.
All right, folks, that's it for today's episode. I'd like to thank Tom Russell for taking the time to visit with me. You can find out more about Tom at tomrussell.com. I'd like to thank the folks with Roots on the Rails for arranging for me to do this live interview with Tom. You can find out more about Roots on the Rails at rootsontherails.com. You can find out more about me and this show at andyhedges.com. If you're enjoying this show and would like to help me keep it going, you can make a donation on the website. Or you could take the time to leave a review and a 5-star rating on the iTunes store. Or you could take the time to tell a friend to give the show a listen. If you'd like to contact me with a question or a comment or a story, I'd love to hear from you. Send an email to andy@andyhedges.com. Thank you for listening to Cowboy Crossroads.